Hello and welcome back to the Developing Solutions with Sitecore Print Experience Manager video training series. This video is an optional video as part of the PXM training series, the purpose of which is to go through all of the text transformations that we need to undertake in order to use this design document. So at this point here, we've done a few minor changes to our rich text transformation. One of the things you'll notice is that often this is more of an iterative process, so not all of the articles that we're going through in Launch Sitecore have all of the text elements that you need to change. So for example, we're going to go through and we're going to look at an article that has most of those typical elements, H1, H2, etc. But there are some articles later in the document that use things like code samples and use a whole new HTML element in order to represent those. So often this is a case where you do some changes up front. Occasionally you make changes to the master document in order to accommodate some of those text differences between the design, and sometimes the design itself uses overrides. So it tends to be iterative. So we're going to go through and I'm going to go through and make a number of the changes that we're seeing in the document that we have loaded. So those include headers as well as bullets. Okay, so we're back at our document that we had loaded earlier. And if we go to our C spread, and we can see that we've got a number of elements here, such as the page editor modes, home tabs, and this looks like a list. And so what's happening is we haven't defined anything in the transformation engine to take these and catch HTML elements like H1, H2, H3, or like these bullets, and turn those into styles within InDesign. So this is useful here because we have our source document, so we can actually look at a number of elements here, and we can see, okay, this is in fact the header 2, and we have other header information that we can look at, and then as well we've got bullets here, so we can say, right, this is called bullets level 1, this is called, bullets level 2. If we have numbered lists here, we can look at, we can say, right, this is called bullets numbered. And so what we need to do is for all these elements is go into Sitecore and start defining these as elements as well. So first and foremost, header 1, header 2, header 3. As we go further down, we'll set those properly. So we'll go back to Sitecore. We will go back to our Print Studio section and modules, InDesign connector, transformations, and definitions. So first off here, what we've got is this mapping that says, right, an H1, which is an XHTML element, translates to a paragraph style in the XML that we send to InDesign. And then in turn, we add an attribute on that XML called style, and the value of that attribute is called heading 1. We want to call that header 1. We're going to save that. And that's to match that style here, this paragraph style in InDesign. That's also the case for H2. So header 2. That's also the case for H3. Header 3. And we'll look at some ordered lists, which is called bullets numbered. So I'm going to say edit that, and I'm just going to copy the name just to avoid any mistakes. So that is an ordered list, and that I will call bullets numbered. And then an unordered list is bullets level 1. So we can go ahead and make these changes. Now, the moment we make these, those will apply to the document that we're loading. Now, normally you can just go to a page and reload it. Because we're using a flow, that is no longer the case. And the reason is the flow is always building this, this number of pages dynamically. If we had selected a style where the sizing of these elements is much bigger, we may have a 6-page document instead of a 4-page document. And so because PXM can't know that and can't reload that, we basically just close that document and start from scratch. And so I'm going to load that now, And so now if we go back to our elements, you can see that some of these elements are now being set correctly. These still aren't. And if we go to paragraph styles, we can see, right, there's no heading 4 element. Well, there's also no header 4 in the source document. And so we basically are making a judgment call. We're saying, right, if you see an H4, go and actually use header 3. And that is also true for H5 as well. So we'll save that change. So we'll save, back to here, close this again, reload, and we'll now start to see our changes. Header, it's called heading 3. Again, make sure your names are consistent. So, H4, heading 3. Now we can update this in the master document as well. That's something that works too. The other thing that you often want to do is rename styles so that they don't have spaces. And the reason is that sometimes if you don't have an element, an HTML element mapped, this may just make a CSS class. And if you know CSS, this is actually 2 classes then. This would be the class heading and the class 3. If you're just going from Sitecore to InDesign, spaces don't matter too much because InDesign can handle spaces just fine. It's really CSS that doesn't. So we can now see that, right, our elements are starting to be mapped better. And so we still have an instance of header 3, so that's fine. But our H4s are now using heading 3, which is correct. Our bullets are now using the bullet list, which is correct. So by and large, a lot of this content is starting to come across properly formatted. So we still have these instances of header 3. That's fine here, so we'll name that to heading 3. Now, there's a number of elements out of the box. So these include paragraphs, H1, H2, H3, lists, tables, image viewing, etc., etc. A couple things to point out. The first is each one of these uses a parser type. This parser type can be overridden. And so in the development section, once we start to do some code and far later into this training series, we're actually going to make 2 custom parser types. We're going to make a custom image parser, which will automatically size these images appropriately for the document. If they're too big, either horizontally or vertically, they will stuff them into this text frame correctly. So we're going to make a custom image parser. We're also going to make a custom code parser, because there are a number of articles that have code on the page and some of the code runs on, and so we're just using that to insert some line returns so that things flow nicely and we're not just seeing content barf onto the page and push to the next page and do things like that. So we are going to make a custom parser or 2, but these are all the elements out of the box. But of course there are more HTML elements here than are in this list, and so you can easily add a new definition. We're going to make one right now. We're going to call it pre, and what that does is, again, it just takes the XHTML element pre and it's going to make a paragraph style. And then what paragraph style within that? Well, we've got our attribute, and that is going to make the style attribute and give it the value of code, because there is actually a code style here within our paragraph styles. So we're going to use that a little bit later on. And last thing is to make sure that we have a HTML node parser in there. And so now if we hit pre-elements on the page, those will get converted into using the code style. So we'll just reload this one more time, make sure everything's good. make sure that our last instances of heading 3 are correct, and they are. And so that's where we'll leave our transformation sets for now, until we start working later in the document and start seeing instances of code and other things where we may need to do some tweaks, both to our transformation set or to our master document itself. One last thing to point out: if you add an additional element, you need to add that to your transformation set list as well. So we would add our pre-element here. And then similarly speaking, you can see this is our default transformation set. If you are working with a number of documents coming from InDesign and a number of masters, you want to make different transformation sets and probably have different definitions. An H1 in one document is going to convert to a completely different style than an H1 in a different document. And so you have the ability, and you need to make different transformation sets that in turn select different definitions. And these can be assigned to the master document. If we go to our media library and our Print Studio projects, you'll see here we've got our NLC design, and there's a drop down to choose transformation sets. And so often you would make a transformation set that is really quite specific to that master document, unless your organization is very disciplined with ensuring that you're using consistent styles across multiple documents. This is probably something that you have to do on a regular basis.